In week 3, the readings are about plot and character as they relate to identity. The readings are Toni Cade Bambara's The Lesson, Alice Walker's Everyday Use, and Plot and Character in the back of your text. Plot is essentially the story and how it unfolds. It is the arrangement of details and events. The author needs to establish causal connections between the key events. Suppose you are telling a story about a bank robbery you witnessed. What details would you consider essential to understanding your version of the events? What details would you leave out? What details would you emphasize? And to what main points would these details support? Suppose you thought the robber was a crazed and fearful individual. Then you might include details of the robber's crazed look and his intimidating behavior. Suppose you thought the bank teller was very brave. Then you would focus on describing the actions and behavior of the teller rather than the robber. When we talk about plot, we are reading the story with attention to how the events develop. Pay attention to the use of action, background, development, climax, and conclusion. Look for conflicts, physical, social, internal, and think of how the author uses them as a way to develop the complexity of the story. Characters are just as important as plot to understanding a story. We have the chance to enter the lives of people we would otherwise never get close to understand them, to know their situations, and perhaps to sympathize or empathize with them. We want to know what motivates them, how they deal with problems and relationships, and whether they are like us or unlike us. Characterization refers to the methods and techniques an author uses to represent people and to enable us to know and relate to them. Ask yourself what you know about a character. How did you come to know this? Do you understand the character's motivation? Can you get into that character's mind? What are you told about the character? What do other characters say about him or her? We can understand characters more fully by paying attention to the kind of techniques the author uses, such as the character's language, the inner thoughts, the dialogue, and so on. For example, as you read The Lesson, one way in which you understand Sylvia is through her use of slang and imperfect English. Those details indicate that Sylvia is street tough and lacks the kind of education that would prepare her for mainstream society. The theme of social identity is explored in both stories. You can look at the main characters' identities as they move from one community to another. In The Lesson, you can understand Miss Moore's intentions and certain details reveal her educational and social background. This is in contrast to the group of children she is mentoring. In particular, Sylvia's identity changes as she leaves her neighborhood and arrives at FAO Schwartz on Fifth Avenue. What details about Sylvia's behavior and actions clue you in on her changing self-perception? What communities is Sylvia moving through? How has her identity at the micro, meso, and macro level been affected? What details indicate that she has become aware that the outside world is vastly different from the world that she lives in day to day? In Everyday Use, we learn about the family's history and Dee's childhood and background, primarily through the mother's recollection. Certain details point out the mother's thoughts and anxieties about Dee's visit. Dee has moved into a college community, but is now returning to the community she has left behind. What details indicate how Dee has changed? How does her mother and sister feel about this change? What is Dee's self-perception? Is it aligned with the mother and sister's perception of her? Think about the ways that the author characterizes the mother, Maggie and Dee. With whom do you identify or sympathize, and why? In The Lesson, listen to the different ways that Miss Moore and the children speak to each other. What do their diction, vocabulary, and sentence length indicate about each character? What is Sylvia's attitude toward Miss Moore? Sylvia describes Miss Moore with certain attributes in a humorous but resentful way. Miss Moore, the only woman on the block with no first name, and she was black as hell, except for her feet, which were fish white and spooky. What does Sylvia resent about Miss Moore? Who is the outsider in the story? Does the role of outsider change as the group moves from one community to another? What lessons do the kids learn that day? Do you see an irony when Sylvia says to herself, "But ain't nobody gonna beat me at nothin'"? Sylvia thinks she's smart. In what ways is she? What is ironical about her kind of smart? Does the author portray Sylvia as a likable character? In everyday use, it's obvious that Dee is different from her mother and Maggie. Think about in what ways they are different and how this has come about. Kirk and Okazawa Ray write, identity formation is the result of a complex interplay among a range of factors. Individual decision and choices, particular life events, community recognition and expectations, societal categorization, classification and socialization, and key national or international events. It is an ongoing process. Here are some questions that may help you understand the story. How does Dee's self-perception of her social location affect her relationship to her mother and sister? How has Dee's identity changed from before she left for college? How do Dee's values differ from her mother and sister's values? Understanding theme, plot, and characterization will help you read more critically and analytically.